Hello, dear brothers and sisters. Pastor Mark with you here for another day of Read Through the Bible 2021. Not here for a specific set of chapters today, but we are here for the book overview for the two epistles of Peter, 1st and 2nd Peter. As the name describes, it is written by the Apostle Peter. And so as we read through this, let's keep in mind all those stories of Peter from the Gospels. Peter is one of the most visible of the disciples through the Gospels, and he had many up and down periods with Jesus. Obviously a fisherman by his first job, his career, and probably just figured he was going to be a fisherman his whole life until Jesus came and changed everything. He was on this amazing ride of traveling with the Messiah and seeing miracles and being a part of those miracles. But then he had the major faltering of faith when he denied his Lord. He probably felt like he was out of the group of disciples until Jesus reincorporated him and told him to feed his sheep. And so that beautiful illustration of a shepherd is echoed in the epistles of Peter. And scholars are quite certain that both of these epistles are written by the authentic Peter. However, there is one significant issue that can be a problem. The writing styles in 1 Peter versus 2 Peter are very different. 1 Peter is polished, it uses a high vocabulary, it's educated Greek, whereas 2 Peter is much more basic, much more rudimentary, even a simpler sentence structure I understand in the Greek. And why would that be? Why would 1 Peter be more eloquent than 2 Peter? We actually have a great explanation for that in the book itself. Toward the end of 1 Peter, Peter says, 5:12, that he wrote it with the help of Silas. Silas, of course, was Paul's missionary companion that we see in the book of Acts and a few other places. And that phrase that he wrote it with the help of Silas can even be translated, I write you this letter through Silas. So it could have been some kind of a situation where possibly Peter was dictating and Silas put the educated words and the good sentence structure. But then some years later, when Peter was writing his second epistle, Silas wasn't around there to help write it. And so that could explain how both of these could be from Peter, but one of the Greeks is significantly better than the other one. Also, we have strong confidence that 2 Peter is the second letter intended to be sent, because in 2 Peter 3:1 he says, "This is now my second letter to you." So it fits. The recipients of these letters were a broad group of Christians in a broad geographical area. You'll see in chapter 1, verse 1, several regions mentioned: Galatia, Cappadocia. I looked up a map. They're all in modern-day Turkey, what they would call Asia Minor back in the Roman days. Several strong themes go throughout the epistles of Peter. First of all, strength in suffering. Peter affirms that unjust suffering is seen by God and witnessed by heavenly agencies, and that it is highly honorable. And there's a call to persevere and endure through the sufferings. Remember your godly calling. Remember how you were born of God. And also remember Jesus' sufferings. That gives us some fuel to get through these sufferings, and his greatest desire is that they would endure through it and that their faith would be purified through it. Another major theme is the sure coming of Jesus and the destruction of the world at the second coming. Also, significant warnings against heretical teachers. In that sense, it's similar to a lot of Paul's writings there. And there's a passage in 1 Peter that is a favorite for Protestants. 1 Peter chapter 2 talks about the concept of the priesthood of all believers. Priests are not a separated sect or subsection within the Christian group, but all Christians can be efficacious ministers on the Lord's behalf. And that is one of the leading principles of Protestantism. That is perhaps Peter's biggest contribution because it's so unique. There's lots of good, meaty truth in Peter's epistles, but a lot of it can be found in other places. But this calling as priests universally is pretty unique to Peter. In many ways, Peter affirms and corroborates Paul's authenticity of his ministry and his writings. At the end of 1 Peter, you see an overt admission that there's a controversy about Paul and some of the things he writes, but Peter affirms that he is an authentic disciple. And that actually resonates with me personally, because when I was in my first teaching position 15 years or more ago at a local academy, there was a person in that community, actually the father of one of my students, who was claiming that Paul was the wolf in sheep's clothing that Jesus was talking about, because he was claiming that Paul really changed the gospel from what Jesus talks about and what the other parts of the New Testament talk about. I was so personally thankful when I found that passage at the end of 1 Peter affirming Paul's ministry and his writings. Now, Peter, as is probably well known, it was prophesied at the end of the Gospel of John that he would die for his faith, that he would become a martyr, and it is believed that he died under the persecution of Nero in the mid-60s. That's not the 1960s, but that's the original decade of the 60s after Jesus lived. So these letters would need to be written shortly before that. In fact, in 2 Peter, he talks about that he expects to die soon. And so it may have been written mere months before he died. Peter famously requested to be crucified upside down as they were preparing to crucify him. He couldn't stand the thought that he would die in the same manner as his Lord. He didn't count himself worthy. You may remember from the Gospels that Peter was very impulsive, and so he asked to be crucified upside down. We don't have an actual biblical passage for that, but that is what is held in church history for a long, long time. And it is affirmed in Acts of the Apostles, Ellen White's book on this period. Check out page 538 if you want to read about the death of Peter. Now, the obvious biggest question about Peter in modern Christianity is the debate, was Peter the first leader of the church? Was he the first de facto pope? You get some pretty impressive verses in the Gospels about, you are Peter and on this rock I will build my church. However, you have some of the harshest words of Jesus also applying to Peter. Things like, get behind me, Satan. So we really look past the Gospels to see if Peter played an authoritative role, not just an authoritative role, but was he head and shoulders above the other apostles? And the short answer is no. We don't see Peter having any extra authority more than the other apostles. Peter is the first to go to a Gentile's house in the book of Acts, but then Paul spent much, much more time among the Gentiles. Also, Acts chapter 15, big controversy about circumcision. They have a council with all the apostles there, but you don't see Peter standing up to lead that discussion. You actually see James, the James that we just read, standing up to do it. So interesting that if Peter had been bestowed some kind of a special authority, it seems like he should have been the one to stand up rather than James. Neither in this epistle does Peter ever claim any authority over other apostles. I actually appreciate in 1 Peter 5, he talks about the role of elders as being shepherds, and he kind of lowers himself, because an apostle would of course be more than an elder, but he says, I consider them my brothers, my co-workers, because I'm an elder as well. And so none of these positions in the church were people trying to strive upward. I mean, Jesus got down on his knees and washed people's feet. And so it was never about authority over, but any authority is just authority to serve and help. So we don't see any scriptural example for that. And perhaps that's also shown by how brief Peter's counsel is compared to Paul or Luke or some of the major New Testament writers. So between 1st and 2nd Peter, I think we get a total of 8 chapters. We'll be in this for just over a week. But compared to the dozens of chapters that Luke wrote, that Paul wrote, even John wrote more, there's more of a footprint from those workers of God than of Peter. Peter obviously spent his time well. I fully expect to see him in heaven. But nothing like, he's the one standing at the pearly gates with the keys to let people in kind of thing. Well, thank you very much for spending these few minutes as we consider an overview before we dive in chapter by chapter. Pray that you are blessed as we continue our way through this. May God bless you and your families and all of us as we submit ourselves to His Word daily. God bless you all. Bye.